Schultz gets me to go up for stewing. I leave the beach. I've got a pair of jeans, cowboy boots, one sweatshirt, because in Pensacola, that's about as cold as it's ever got.
Exactly.
No jacket, no heavy coat, nothing. I get up 3 days later, I'm drive. It takes about 3 days, two and a half, 3 days to get there. Because I had trouble at one of the borders. I went to the wrong place. And Stu said, hey, you're supposed to cross the Sweetgrass in Montana. And I said, well, fuck, I'm in North Dakota. I didn't know. He said, hey, you got to go all the way over to Montana. So now I got to go all the way across the state of Montana to go to Sweetgrass. You know where that crossing is. So I get up there and I go to Stu and say, hey, come on up to the house. I want to meet you. It's 35 below zero. It's freezing cold. Snow is knee deep. And I go up, ring the doorbell. Wait. I said, is anybody home? Heck, I'm leaving. Just when I get almost to the, hey, come on up here. He didn't let me in the house. We stood out on his front porch. Now it's freezing cold and my teeth are banging together. And he said, now he's going to give me the, I had this, and I was going to the gym, working out and everything, doing things the right way, I thought. It's this big guy here, superstar Wayne Coleman. He never called you Billy Graham.
No, God, no.
So when I once called you many years ago, I said, hey, is this superstar Wayne Coleman then? So anyway, he's, you know how Stu would touch on you and rub on you.
Oh, yeah.
He had the big deltoids, like cantaloupes, and I put it up here, and he gets my arm up here, and then he runs his other arm across, and he's got me like this, and then I just held him.
Yeah, more like a front face
And he said, hey, the big deltoids, and the traps and everything. Just cut the blood out.
You burned me over, brother.
So they got me like this, and I'm going, oh yeah, okay, I understand, yes.
I got it.
And I've told that story hundreds and hundreds of times to people about my first meeting of him, and he used you as his example of how he's big deltoids and big traps. And then all the time Stu's talking, he's moving you in position. And I'd never seen that hole before, and I'll never forget it. I've never had it put on me since then, but I have put it on other people just to show them. And, you know, if you're a small, little, thin fellow that's not too heavy, you know, you can kind of slide out of it.
Yeah, right.
If you're a bigger guy like we were, and they get you here, I mean, you don't, it's all cut off.
Everything's cut off. It's cut off.
But I never went into the dungeon.
I remember, oh no, come on.
I went.
Oh my God, how'd you get away with not going into the dungeon, brother?
He said,
you miss holy ground.
He said, yeah, you're going to have to come by the house one day and we'll work out, you know. That Luther Lindsay carried the picture in the pocket and everything, and George Gertie Hinkle, so you know all these stories. You heard all this before. Stu loved George Gertie Hinkle, and he loved Luther Lindsay for some reason, and they were, I guess, good shooters or something. And yeah, they were a good test for him.
Oh yeah.
Stu was a great athlete.
Oh yeah.
Boxer, wrestler.
Exactly. He's legit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he's in the Canadian Boxing Hall of Fame, and
he's a legit athlete, brother.
Canadian amateur wrestler. Yeah. Yeah. Really.
Because I was talking earlier on my little piece. I remember Stu saying, let me see your neck. Let me see hand me your, I said, what do you mean, let me see your neck? He said, well, I want to show you a hole. And see, like I was saying earlier, nobody's smartened me up yet. Even Bob Luke, the football player, brought me up there. Nobody's smartened me up. I wasn't smartened up for weeks, brother. For weeks. It took him a month to finally smarten me up. The fucking thing was work. You understand what I'm talking about? It's too hard. Let me see your neck. I said, what do you mean, see my neck? He said, well, I want to show you a hold. I thought he was my trainer.
I think he's going to like show you something.
Show me something.
No.
So I stick my head down there, and he put that front face lock on.
Hey, come on.
And dropped to my knees.
And this opportunity arose to be a wrestler. So this Stu Hart thing came up. Go down there and I'm gonna make my dad proud. Now I tried to kill him and I didn't do it.
So someone told you to go to the dungeon, somebody suggested you go to Calgary.
Okay, good. That's a good call because I left that out. I went down to the Portland Sports Arena where Portland Wrestling was. So now I want to make my dad proud and get out of the industry a little bit. And go down there. I talked to a guy named Dutch Savage. Dutch Savage said, go down to Calgary, Alberta, and meet Stu Hart. I go down there. I told my dad what I was going to do, and he was real proud of me. So my other half brothers took care of my dad when I went down there. I was only there for about a month, and I didn't like it. You know, it just Dynamite Kid trained me. You know.
What year would this have been?
This was August of '82.
Okay.
I had just turned 29. And then I missed the drug scene, you know. Yeah. I missed making the big money and all that. So
who was training you?
Dynamite Kid did most of the training. Davey Boy Smith did some. Bret Hart never even gave me the time of day because at that time I was 6'3", about 280. I was on roids at that time too. A lot of guys were on roids at that time. Yeah. And so why I don't know. Didn't care anyway.
What did Stu think of you? Because you seem like the type he would have loved back then.
Stu, when I knocked on the door, he said, "You big bastard," you know, like that. And Stu stretched me down the dungeon. Down in that Stu Hart dungeon, there's little holes everywhere, where and then you sign it. And I don't know if I signed it or not, but like one of those holes in there is my head, where I got rammed through it. He put me in the front. He'll put you in the front face lock. Yeah. And then you've got to try and get out of it, you know. And then he'll brace himself up against the wall. And what he did with me, I tried to ram him through the wall, ended up ramming my head through it. And he squeezed me, picked me all the way up and to unconsciousness. And I woke up, I don't know how, maybe 20 seconds later. And I got to go outside because it was in August of '82, it was summer. And so I made it to the outside ring. I had all this talent, but I wanted to go back into drug dealing. Went back to Portland.
Did you ever have a match?
Yeah, I did have matches. Yeah, I did have matches in on Friday, Calgary, and did a few runs to Regina and stuff like that.
So even with limited training, they threw you in there?
Yeah. I only trained 10 days. I had my first match.
Who was booking at that time? Was it?
That's a good question. I think maybe Bruce Hart. I don't know if Bret Hart was.
It revolved quite a lot down there, so.
Yeah, I don't really remember who was booking. All I remember is the Regina was 500 miles one way and 500 back. And the guys, I never realized what volume was until we went to Regina. I made $25 Canadian. And then on the way back, this guy named Wakamatsu used to drive. Yeah. And he'd fall asleep. So I'd take over and drive. Everybody was passed out, and I would drive back to Regina, or to Calgary from Regina. And that was quite interesting. And
so I don't blame you actually for wanting to go back to making more money.
Well, it was a great experience. So I mean, I got to meet the wrestlers and stuff. And
what did you think of Bruce? Because a lot of people have varying opinions on him.
Well, he always treated me good, except when I found out that he had some 14-year-old. He was a teacher and had some 14-year-old girl he was going to marry. Or got her pregnant.
He ended up marrying her. A movie could be made about the whole situation. But That was a whole weird situation.
But when I heard that he was with a 14-year-old too, that was, I got to admit, that was a turnoff for me, being an abused kid. So I got out of there a little bit. I may have been using that for an excuse too, I don't know. But I didn't like it. And I
She would have been about 14 at that time, I guess, right, when you were there?
Yeah, in 82? Yeah. Yeah. And in fact, he was pretty public about it. He brought her, I think she even came over to her at the Stewart house, for dinners and stuff. So, and but I went back to Portland, and Dr. D. David Schultz was there, and Rip Oliver, and I was working out in the gym, and he said, "You can be a pro wrestler. How'd you do down there?" I said, "Nah, I didn't like it." They were working out at the same gym I was, so he said, "Why don't you come down to Portland Wrestling, just see what you've learned, because we need a baby face." So I went down there, and we had a match for like 15 minutes, and it was a good match. He said, "Shit, man, you've learned. Why don't you just come here and be a babyface from Portland?" And I said, "Nah, I'm kind of into other stuff, and by that time, I knew a lot of the wrestlers because they used to come to the Stone Pony and get drugs from me, buy coke.
Yeah.
And I don't want to mention any names there either, just because it would be kind of unfair,
Yeah.
A lot of them passed away. And so they knew what I already was, and so they wanted me to get in this other world, and so I got into Portland wrestling.
I saw Abdullah the Butcher almost decapitate an Indian in Lethbridge, the city of Lethbridge, Canada. Abdullah was the main event, but this was the second match on the card, and I saw him cut this Indian, and they gave the Indian $15 for the match, and Abdullah showed me his blade. He used like a popsicle stick, and he would tape the blade to the popsicle stick. And I was watching him, and I just watched him, and he went out there at the second match, and when he got in the ring, he just grabbed the Indian, and he just started slicing this Indian's face up, and his neck, and his shoulders, and my God, it was like manslaughter. And 30 seconds later, it was over, and we went back to the locker room, and I get back there, and I see this Indian standing there, covered with blood from his head to his wrestling boots, literally covered in blood, and he was a dark-skinned Indian, and he was starting to turn white from losing blood. And I said, "This guy is going to die. You people better call," they didn't call them paramedics back then, it was just an ambulance. I said, "You better call an ambulance because this guy's going to die. He's going to lose all of his blood." And so they did. They did call an ambulance, and they stopped the bleed. They wrapped him up while they waiting for the ambulance. He was covered with this blood, and I said, "Butcher, Abby," I said, "Why'd you cut this guy up so bad for? He's a Coleman. I had to get my heat. I had to get my heat, baby. I had to get my heat." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, I'm in the main event." I said, and he said, "Me cutting up this Indian put some heat on me." And I said, "Well, yeah, you better hope the guy doesn't die because you'll go to jail for murder." He just laughed at me, and so it was literally a massacre that I watched before my very eyes. I never had seen anything like this. It was chilling. It was absolutely chilling just to see him stand in this ring and start slicing another man. It was like something you'd see in a movie. It was like an assault, like like maybe the mafia is gonna kill you or something, a hitman. And it actually kind of scared me a little bit, you know. And Abby just laughed it off. He says, "I got to get my heat, Coleman. I got to get my heat." I said, "Well, you got the heat all right. Let's just hope the guy doesn't die." And so he didn't die. And as they were the ambulance crew were putting him on the gurney and all wrapped up in towels, they stuffed the $15, his payoff, underneath the towel, underneath his head. "Oh, here's your $15." And that was the last we saw of the Indian. My recollection is that he would use this blade taped to the popsicle stick on himself also. Now he could have later on, because I wasn't with him all those years, you know, he could have advanced to maybe taping it to his finger or something, but the times I saw him cut himself, it was like he was slicing his forehead with that blade taped to the popsicle stick. Of course, I would watch the matches because I had to learn what was going on, so I wanted to watch the matches anyway. But when he would get someone on a lower end person, he'd cut them without their permission, and but he would not cut the main event opponent like a Billy Robinson or a David Rule or one of the main event people without their permission. But he would definitely cut up some of the lower opening card guys. They seem to do that every now and then, throw a guy out there so Abby could slice him up to get some heat. And it was just like a butcher shop. And so I guess that's why he got his name, Abdullah the Butcher. It's like he was butchering people up, but he never did it to the main event people.
Back to the Stampede territory, who actually recommended you for the Stampede territory? Because that's not a very pleasant area to go. That's where I was actually trained, but for someone from the south to go to those frigid temperatures.
Well, it was from. I went to Japan with Keith Hart, and he told his dad about me. And then the Cuban assassin from Columbia over there in Nova Scotia, he went straight to Calgary every year.
Yeah, they would come back in the winter.
And they started talking about me, and Stu said, "Well, I think we need to give him a try, you know." And after I got there, Stu said, "Yeah, this guy's great, man. He's going to do great." You know, and I stayed there 3 years. And had the biggest houses they ever had. I mean, we was packing them in. It was so easy, you know. I mean, working with Brett and Saito. I mean, Cuban Assassin. These guys was all good workers, you know. And the people were so close in these buildings. They're right there with you, you know. And they didn't like me, but they did like me, but they didn't like me. But they knew when they left, they had a show. They was happy. They weren't happy, they were mad or whatever, but they were satisfied. They didn't get ripped off, you know. And we had some barn burners over there, man.
They had a lot of different bookers in Stampede, but I guess Bruce would have been maybe one of the main bookers at the time you were there.
Yeah, I think he called himself a booker, yeah.
What was your thoughts on his booking style?
Well, he liked to bring the English guys in, small guys, because he was a small guy. And he didn't like the big guys. And, you know, when he'd get in the ring with me, he would just go crazy, you know. And I told him one night, I said, "Bruce, if you hit me in my mouth tonight, I'm gonna hurt you." And all of a sudden, here comes Bruce making his comeback. He hits me right in my hard. And when he did, I come from Mama's house. boom, broke his nose all up, man, blood poured out of his eyes, his face. They took him to the hospital. He got all kinds of stitches and stuff. And Stu said, "And David, you kind of laid it in on him, didn't you?" And I said, "Yeah, I did, Sue." He said, "Yeah, the little bastard can take it though. He can take it. That's good. That's good." He come back, his nose all over. I said, "Bruce, you moved. Why didn't you stay still? You moved." That was my main thing when I hit somebody hurt. I said, "Why'd you move?" Well, they go, "Move."
And you actually brought up an incident, speaking of that, in your book that Dynamite Kid referred to in his book, where there was something similar that happened in a match with Dynamite around that time, where I guess he was stiffed or something, or you were stiffed by Dynamite,
Yeah.
and he
Yeah.
came back to confront you, and you guys ended up making up.
Yeah, we was just, something happened in the match. He was pretty stiff, and I got back stiff with him and all this, and we just discussed it, and it was over. Me and Dynamite, great friends. You know, he was kind of upset he never could beat me arm wrestling, but, you know, that's...
Because I guess you guys would have been probably known as the toughest two in this history of Stampede Wrestling, which was known for tough wrestlers.
Yeah. Dynamite was a tough kid, man. And then, of course, Davey Boy came over, and he weighed 170 pounds when he got there, and when he left, he weighed 300 before he died, I think. So, but that's amazing that somebody would destroy his life with that many anabolic steroids and stuff. And I mean. But then you look at Hogan, look at him. I mean, I thought this guy'd been dead a long time ago. I can't believe he's still living.
Yeah, and actually Superstar Billy Graham as well. He took a lot, and he's still alive. He just turned 75, I think.
Yeah.
And Davey Boy Smith's son is friends with me, and he wanted me to ask you your memories of your 1984 New Japan tour with the Bulldogs, if you have any recollection of that.
Well, we just had a good time. You know, when you put Dynamite and Davey Boy together, and then you put me in there with them, that's really, that's kind of like you got a keg, you're putting Dynamite in it, and Davey Boy and Dynamite in that keg, and then they bring me in, I'm the fuse. So we was always doing things that, it was a great tour, man. 5 weeks of nothing but didn't know what was going to happen the next day, And when we was in the ring, we really made the Japanese wrestlers, they come out, most of the ring, all they can say is, But Inoki, he liked it, and Baba, they liked it, and the boys didn't like it, but we didn't abuse them. We just made them work real hard.
And the last thing for Stampede for now, who would have won in a shoot between Roy Welch and Stu Hart?
Ooh, that would have been between Herb Welch and Stu Hart.
Herb Welch.
Not Roy, okay.
Sorry.
Herb Welch and Stu Hart. That'd been a hard call right there, because Stu Hart used to tell me about Luther Lindsay was his Memphis, that's one he always wanted,
Yeah.
But Stu Hart and Herb Welch is a hard man. He was a hard man to beat, the way I heard, and I'd hate to know I had to go in there and beat him. I mean, especially in his prime, But he was 67 years old, 66 years old when he trained me. I wouldn't want to try to beat him then, let alone when he's 40. He would have been awful hard to beat,
And you avoided the dungeon, from what I understand.
Oh yeah, no, didn't go to the dungeon. I always told Stu, I said, hey, you get the Holt on me. I'm not going to give you a Holt and let you torture me. I know the young kid that Owen.
Yeah.
He used to come in the dressing room when he was young. He was a good amateur wrestler, and him and I would wrestle in the dressing room, and every once in a while I'd hook him. Stu'd walk in, and of course Stu's famous saying was, "Hey, it looks like you got that little bastard in a pretty tight situation there, David." I'll say, "Yeah, why don't he get out of it?" I don't think he can.
Oh, the travel was, gosh, it was brutal. It was easy in the summertime because Stu would close in the summer, and all the guys would go over to Prince Edward Island or go over to Nova Scotia and work over there and work the Maritimes. I never went, and so I stayed there in the summers, and we only worked 3-4 shows. We kept doing the TV in the summer, and we'd work Lethbridge on a Thursday night, Calgary on Friday, Edmonton on Saturday, then we had the whole week off. But during the winters, when the winter time came and you're in the van and you got all the Hearts and you got 2 vans going, they got ball tires on them, it's black ice, they're pulling the ring, they're going 100 miles an hour. We'd have to wait, we would wait and wait and wait for Brett to get there because he was always late, and we're sitting there in the cold, and the heater barely worked, and we're waiting and waiting, and Brett's an hour late, or one of his other brothers will be an hour later. The van wouldn't even be there to pick us up, and we had to go 500 miles up in the Indian territories, and sometimes the match is supposed to start at 7:30. They wouldn't even set the ring up to like 9 or 10 at night, and then we had to turn around and drive back. It was brutal, but by the same token, I knew that someday I would get a break and go somewhere. And my break actually came out of Calgary to go to the old WWF.
While you were in Calgary, did you ever get stretched by Stu down in the dungeon?
No, I never went down there. He did stretch me on his front porch. The first day I got there, I came up from Pensacola, Florida. I had a pair of blue jeans. I had cowboy boots on. I had one sweatshirt because I lived on the beach. I mean, I didn't have winter clothes. I had my high school leather football jacket, and that was it. And we're out on the porch, and it's 30 below zero, and the wind's blowing. He didn't ask me to come in the house. He stood out on the porch, and we talked. And then he started touching me, and you're in pretty good shape there. Because, I'd been lifting weights, and I was 240 pounds, 20-inch arms, 20-inch neck, and I felt like I was in good shape. And he compared me to superstar Billy Graham. He said because my name was Wayne, and I had that Wayne Coleman. He had this big deltoids like pineapples up here on his shoulders. And what I did, and all the time he's talking to me, he's rotating my body, and then pretty soon he's got me like this. He's going, hey, and I put it on the big superstar Billy Graham, and he almost passed out. And he said, you'll have to come over after you let me go. I was like, oh, man, this guy just cracked my neck, my shoulder. He said, you'll have to come over and we'll go downstairs and get a few workouts in if you want. I said, yeah, maybe so. That'd be a good idea. I never went down there at all. I never even went back to the house at all.
So you never sampled any of his cooking?
No, I never did. I was never inside the house. I did go there to pick up Wayne Hart or to pick up Smith or one of the guys one time. And while I was waiting, I did get out of the car and I looked down in the dungeon. I looked down in there, and there was a big laundry room, I remember, and it was like clothes were piled up, like piles of laundry, and because that was the laundry room, and then right beside it was Stu had a little set of weights, a little weight room, and just a little mat on the floor, and I just remember Brett on the van sometimes. Brett had the cassette tape. He probably still has it, and Stu had this kid down there, and Brett's playing a tape for everyone to listen to, and the kid's going, ah, 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 and Stu's, hey, come on, fight back, be a man, ah, ah, ah. It was like a real torture chamber.
And the Hart family, would you say they got along well? They love Stu and they love their mother. They all loved each other. If you, as an outsider like me or somebody, would try to interfere into their business, then they would all stick together for sure. But I've seen them argue, and I've seen them get into fights with each other in the backstage, and sometimes right in front of the fans in Calgary. I saw Smith and Stu go at it, and I saw Bruce and Brett go at it, and
Was that the time that Smith kicked?
Smith tried to kick Stu down below, and with I call it a Puerto Rican uppercut, but he tried it with his foot. Stu blocked him, and Stu went to kick Smith, and Smith turned and ran away. And I still have a good rapport with all that family. After all these years, I have a respect for them, what they went through, and they have a respect for me because I not only went there and got over and sold out a lot of places, sold out a lot of buildings along with them, but every time I would leave, I'd turn around and come back 3-6 months later, and I was back there like 3 different times. You know, they must have thought I had to be crazy, because some people only would stay 2 weeks, they'd leave. They pulled a lot of ribs on people, and I was fortunate enough to not be part of that ribbing that they did. I'd seen them put cigarettes on top of John Foley's head while John Foley was sleeping. You know, they might shave someone's eyebrow off. I mean, what are you going to do for 8 hours in a van? You can only have so many beers, and pretty soon you got to start ribbing guys.
And you actually started in that territory calling yourself Honky Tonk Wayne.
Well, I sent my bio and everything up to Bruce, because Bruce was doing all the writing of the magazines and putting out the programs. And I was Honky Tonk Man down in Pensacola. This is where I started this black hair and a jumpsuit about, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ahead of that.
Do you want to go into that before you tell us about Bruce, maybe?
Well, I don't want to forget Bruce, because when I got to Calgary, and the first thing they introduced me, or I opened the program, it said Honky Tonk Wayne. What? I didn't send you that up here. I sent you Honky Tonk Man. I just thought it might be better if we call you partly by your real name and partly by the gimmick name. Oh, well, thanks a lot, because I didn't want it to be that way.
Did Bruce Hart have anything to do with coming up with the Honky Tonk Man gimmick?
No, absolutely not. I think we went over that earlier with, you know, the wrestling fans in Mobile and Pensacola down in Southeast gave me the jumpsuit. I had the black hair. Robert Fuller gave me the guitar. I gave myself the name off a record, Johnny Horton's I'm a Honky Tonk Man. And that's how that started. Then Bruce, the only thing Bruce did was change the name to Honky Tonk Wayne, and which I hated and I didn't want. And so I even had a jacket at home that I wore as a ring jacket that had Honky Tonk Man on it. On the back, it had Honky Tonk Man. On the front, it was embroidered. Honky Tonk Man, like a tour jacket that the country and western people had back then. And I had to cover up the name on the front. I couldn't wear it on their TV because it said Honky Tonk Man on the back, but he was calling me Honky Tonk Wayne. My wife remembers me as that because that's how she met me, as that character. And, you know, Schultz would always say, oh, just let it go. Don't worry about it. Dr. D. David Schultz. I said, well, you know, that's not how I've created this character. It's not that way. But Bruce had nothing to do with the creation of this character. He had nothing to do with the guitar. I brought it with me. I used it up there. Stu was the one who said, sure, I like it. Let's do it. And, you know, I really answered to Stu the whole time I was there and no one else.
Now, I recently read Bruce Hart's book, and it seems like there's a lot of tension between Bruce and Brett in the book over the years.
Oh, gosh, yes.
Including back when you wrestled for them.
Oh, yes.
Did you ever notice any tension between Bruce and Brett?
I saw them have their words. I saw them periodically. They might push each other. I mean, they never actually punched each other or anything that I know of. They always had Sunday dinner. I can imagine being a fly on the wall at that big Sunday dinner with all the whole family there every Sunday to listen to what was going on. But Bruce was the booker, but yet he didn't give finishes so much to me and to David Schultz or to Brett. Brett did his own thing, and Brett was always, unless someone else like a David Schultz or Dan Crawford that was a big star there, they were always, the guys that Stu was pushing, the outsiders, were always the North American heavyweight champion, unless Brett had the belt at some time or another, and then the world's champion was coming in, whether it be Harley Race or whether it be Nick Bockwinkel. Then Brett would always wrestle the world's champion. So Bruce never liked that because Bruce was booking and he thought he should be the one that was wrestling the world's champion, or he thought he should be one calling the finishes. But by the same token, he didn't call the finishes for certain guys. And that made his job difficult. I understand that when you're having to split your power. And I just know that Brett always wanted to wrestle the world's champion. He got to wrestle the world's champion except the one time that I know of. And it was just before Brett and Dynamite and Davey and Jim Neihart went to WWF. Nick Bockwinkel came to town, and Dr. D. David Schultz made a power play on Stu and said, I'm the North American heavyweight. I don't care who the North American heavyweight. I think Brett was at the time maybe, because Schultz was in a tag team match with me. I don't care who the North American champion is. It might have been Leo Burke at that time. He said, I want to wrestle Nick Bockwinkel, and that's just how it is. I've been up here for all these years, and I've done this for you, and I've done this, I've done that, and I've had to listen to this and listen to that, and all this stuff you guys do around here. either I wrestle Nick Bockwinkel or I'm walking. So Nick came to town, and David wrestled Nick Bockwinkel, but I later found out that it might have been a way for David to wrestle Nick Bockwinkel because David wanted to go to AWA because Hogan was down there and they were doing great business. Payoffs were good. It wasn't that far of a trip out of Calgary to get down to Minneapolis, and he eventually, a couple of months later, he ended up at the AWA.
Did you ever hear that David Schultz has claimed that he actually came up with the idea for the first WrestleMania?
I was there, but I was in the car when he would talk about it. We would drive 300, 400, 800 miles, and he had this idea about WrestleMania. And he had this idea about having these stars come in.
Because I heard he would say over and over Dr. D and Mr. T, and he wanted it to be Dr. D and Mr. T.
And then something happened where they used Paul Orndorff and Piper, Mr. T and Hogan, and he got cut out of the loop. And I don't know the inside story on why he was cut out of the loop on that first WrestleMania.
I believe it had something to do with the John Stossel incident.
I think it probably did. It could have. You'd have to, that would be an interesting story to sit down with Dr. D. David Schultz and get his insight. Let me go back just for a second and say that I had a dispute with Stu, myself and David Schultz. So we called up Al Tomko. Al Tomko was promoting his All-Star Wrestling out of Vancouver, and they were the same as Turner Broadcasting, TBS in Atlanta. The station in Vancouver was the first satellite TV station in Canada that they beamed the signal all across Canada. And so for us to be on that BC TV was a major, major deal, especially if you wanted to be known across Canada, because Stu's TV only went in Alberta and Saskatchewan. It didn't go into BC or anything like that.
And Alberta and Saskatchewan are fairly scarcely populated
Right.
provinces for anyone who doesn't know Canada.
So Stu and, of course, Bruce and a couple of the brothers, they disliked Al Tomko to no end, and why, I do not know. Because Al never really came to Calgary. He never tried to steal talent from them. I mean, Jerry Morrow would go over there and work for Al Tomko. He would come back, and Jerry would work for Stu. And a lot of guys would go back and forth sometimes. But when David and I decided that we were a hot program in Calgary, we'll take this program and go over for Al Tomko. He offered us twice as much money, so we said, sure, we'll go. So we went over and did that for Al. And going over for Al, I was able to then establish Honky Tonk Man. Not Honky Tonk Wayne anymore. Al, I want to be called Honky Tonk Man. Well, then Schultz leaves, goes back to Stu, goes to Minneapolis. I stay with Al. And for the next 6 or 8 months or a year, I was all across Canada on Canadian TV. I went back for Stu. We buried the hatchet. Everything was good. And then WWE came through. I met Hogan and those guys again that I haven't seen in 10, 12 years, like I said earlier. And then when I met up with him in Calgary, he said, man, why don't you come join us? How come you never come to Minnesota? And all this stuff. And then he said,
Hogan was working for WWE?
Yes. They had a big show at the Calgary Stampede, and Stu was able to get me on the card. It was sold out. It was 22,000 people at the Saddle Dome. And that was my in with Hogan. He took me in the bathroom, and he said, how come you ain't joined up with us yet? I said, well, I didn't know. I mean, I didn't think I was good enough. And he says, man, you're as good as anybody else. He said, I'll have Vince call you tomorrow. Next morning, 8 o'clock, phone rang, and that was it. I told him, I said, I need to tell Stu and give a notice. He said, that's the right thing to do. He called Stu himself. He said, I want to start using this guy.
What was it like training in the dungeon that's produced so many great wrestlers over the years?
Yes. Well, the first time I was in Calgary, we were training at the Matt Rats studio. They actually had a television studio, so our sessions were there. Although I did wrestle on some Stampede wrestling shows where I basically, quite literally, just got my butt kicked by the veterans because I legitimately had very little training. And in Stampede wrestling, it was not a rich territory. They were running consistently, but not drawing very well. It wasn't uncommon to have 40 or less people at an event. So there were times, in my earlier days, I usually wrestled for free. Eventually it worked up to 20, I think the most I ever made for Stampede wrestling as just a wrestler was $75. But there were times I remember when they would pay certain of the veterans in change, literally change. So yeah, because of this, sometimes there'd only be 4 matches available for a show or 5 matches available for a show. So we would have to go 20 or 30 minutes, so they would just throw us in there. And a guy like me who really did not know anything about pro wrestling would be fighting this guy that's been through the dungeon or something along those lines, had been around for a while, and they would just beat on me for 20 minutes, give me some offense here or there, but they were fairly hard beatings, but I loved it. I was really happy to be in the Stampede wrestling ring, but now I came back and I actually joined the dungeon, which that cost money. I had to save up once again, pay to do the dungeon. And then I was actually training at the Hard House and being part of Stampede's regular cards. And at that time, they had 4 Fridays a week in Calgary. They had 2 different venues in Calgary they were running, and then spot shows that they were also running on weekends. So we would wrestle a good amount. And sometimes these spot shows were really far away. Sometimes you'd be driving ridiculous distances in a snowstorm and on icy, dark roads, and literally you'd have to set up the ring, take down the ring, get your butt kicked, and drive home. And you'd be sometimes lucky if you got $20 for that. So you learned how to wrestle, and you learned how to. I wrestled a lot of Broadways, and Bruce Hart was the booker and main trainer in the dungeon.
Did Bruce train you?
Yes, yeah, it was Bruce training me. Stu was still around at that time, but he was not very mobile, and he would just basically be pushed in his wheelchair to just sit at the door and watch, or in the summer they'd have the ring outside sometimes, and he would go out there and watch. Sometimes he would allow someone to put a move on them, and he would demonstrate a move, but he was in his last year. I pretty much finished my time there when they had to sell the house and the dungeon finished.
So Stampede was known for a very hard-hitting style, and it's not what a lot of people might be used to. What's your opinion on that style being employed on young wrestlers?
I like that style, and there was a lot of people that came into the dungeon, and people could always come for 1 or 2 day tryouts to try it out. And very few of those people came back. Of course, everyone had been tortured going in there, and with Bruce it was a little different than Stu. Stu was a pretty good amateur wrestler, knew a lot of holds, so he would submit people or put them in submissions and punish them. Bruce was not the most amateur wrestling inclined. He did know some holds that he would demonstrate from time to time, or have other wrestlers demonstrate on each other, but with him it was mostly, sometimes you'd have to take 60 chops of practice, get slapped in the face 10 times, practice. There you're learning how to fall on literally pads over cement floor, a basement floor, and you're taking 60 to 100 falls every practice. So that's what I always say to people that get injured from taking bad bumps or something like this, because the way we learned it was very painful, but you had to learn how to fall properly, because the mats were absolutely unforgiving. It wasn't at all like a trampoline, or very unforgiving. So you had to learn how to fall properly, or you wouldn't last long. So the way that they weeded people out of the dungeon wasn't necessarily by cardio, although getting beat on by several veterans for maybe an entire practice, which could last up to four hours, sometimes even more than 4 hours, but on average I would say 3 hours. I mean, you'd be weeded out pretty fast, and those veterans had been put through hell, so they wanted to beat on the new people. So that's the way it was, and I'm glad I was trained that way. But you certainly had to be tough to make it through the dungeon, because you just didn't last if you weren't.
So you're known for having very hard-hitting matches. How has training there and learning how to bump properly influenced or impacted your career, basically?
The hard-hitting matches is just, that's the way I learned how to wrestle, and that's the way I like to wrestle. and learning how to fall properly. I'd never had a serious injury from wrestling, and I've been wrestling a long time. I started in 2001. We're now in 2016. So I've never had a bone injury or anything from wrestling other than obviously aches and pains and bruises and cuts and pain like that, but no serious injuries from not knowing how to wrestle properly.
So you mentioned the houses weren't the biggest in Stampede. What were some of the biggest houses they drew?
The biggest one they drew that I ever wrestled on there was probably 450, when that was a really big one. So those were in the definitely the dying days of Stampede wrestling, but there were good wrestlers. Johnny Devine was there, as we mentioned, TJ, Harry Natty, Rick Vicker was there. A lot of great talent. So it was still a learning ground.
Was Jim Neidhart still around that time?
Jim Neidhart would do events here and there, yes. I remember him being around. He was always a comical character.
What was he like? Do you have any funny stories about him?
I actually met Davey Boy Smith a few times in the locker room at Mat Rats, but he wasn't actually wrestling on those shows. He was just hanging out with his son, Harry, and Georgia, Harry's sister. But I think the first star wrestler, other than Jacques Rougeau, that I'd actually been in a dressing room with was Jim Neidhart. So I guess I'm not going to talk about the advice that he gave me, but he did give me some advice. The first star wrestler to start giving me advice, I guess, he gave that to me on an Indian reserve in Lethbridge, Alberta one night. So I guess he was the first star that kind of advised me.
Abdullah the Butcher, the most violent man in the history of professional wrestling. While that may have been true 20, 30, 50 years ago, but tonight, I'm the most violent man in professional wrestling. I am the most violent man in perhaps even the world. We've met before in Puerto Rico, and it's been a no contest. But tonight, there will be a victor, and that victor will be me.
This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com as you see me give Abdullah a boot to the face followed by some forearm shots. I'm commentating a match here that I came across today while looking for some other footage. I actually didn't even realize I had footage of this match. This is the very first encounter I had with WWE Hall of Famer Abdullah the Butcher. I actually had the last feud of Abdullah the Butcher's career from 2006 to 2009. This is a very gory match as it continues. I believe Abdullah is already busted open here, but it's definitely not the best match of our series, nor the most violent, even though this one gets very violent. I believe the two favorites of mine featuring Abdullah were two tag team matches that we had together as a team. We were known as Pain and Destruction. One of them was from Edmonton, Alberta, where we just destroyed two wrestlers that were very well known in Edmonton, and it was just a brutal beating. And the other was a match that I've posted on here that I put together around the time that I thought I was going to WWE after I got signed. I put it together with about 10 days notice just to get some revenge on some people. I knew they wouldn't fight me, but I knew they were Abdullah the Butcher fans. So if I put Abdullah in the match, they would say yes. So that was a lot of fun, even though that was not a money-making event or the biggest crowd. But this was actually a Stampede wrestling match. The last Stampede wrestling match I ever wrestled on. So it's historic. from that reason, for the fans that remember me from my Stampede wrestling days. And on this same card was actually the last Stampede wrestling match of Tyson Kidd and Davey Boy Smith Jr., who wrestled on this same event. It was in Cochrane, Alberta, just outside of Calgary, as Abdullah the Butcher just broke a beer bottle and used it to smash me in the face. As I said, this is a violent match. We see Honest John Cheatham, the fat guy on the outside there with the hat. He's dead now. Didn't shed one tear over his death. He was a real scumbag. Everyone knows, I'm not going to get into it, I had legal battles in Canada and the US, which I won against Abdullah the Butcher in later years. And it was funny, at one of the mediations that we had, he flew all the way from Atlanta, Georgia to Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and he brought his wrestling manager with him, and that was quite a gong show, to say the least. But that was years after this, as we see Abdullah looking like a bloody Jabba the Hutt. He was more mobile in this match than he was in our later matches, although he was moving fairly slow overall here. As you can see, that beer bottle has started to do a number on my head there. So we see Abdullah the Butcher showing his thirst for blood right there. And now he's got that beer bottle just driving it into my face. I managed to get the fork away from him at the start of this match, but now I see he has the fork back. This was over 10 years ago. This was about 12 or 13 years ago. And just to answer the question, hey, why you guys hate Abdullah so much? Why do you still post matches and videos of him on this channel? Well, for one thing, this match was incredibly painful, and I did have to get stitches after this match. So the least I could do is put it out there. It was very well received. They actually write about this match in the Stampede Wrestling book, which I don't recommend. I'm not a fan of the guy that wrote it, and he definitely put his own spin on things in his book. There's a lot of false facts in there, and a bunch of times in that book he speaks for the dead Stu Hart and gives his opinion on, well, if Stu Hart were alive, he would have said this, he would have said that. Well, you have no idea what he would have said or not, and you can't put words into his mouth because he was passed away by the time you wrote that book. As we see Abdullah the Butcher throwing me into that plastic table, which sometimes those plastic tables can be more painful than the wooden tables. And now he's just stabbing away with the fork, waddling around. He reminds me of the Penguin from Batman here, but definitely more of a violent character than the Penguin. As you can see, the blood is just dripping out of me like a faucet from that beer bottle. I believe I'm actually more violent than Abdullah, because yes, I can use weapons, but I don't need weapons to inflict pain. And clearly the referee is making no effort here to get that fork away from Abdullah. And for the record, I was fully in control of this match before he took out the beer bottle. So you see blood splattered all around the ringside area at the Spray Lakes Arena in Cochrane, Alberta, a town that I actually lived in during my time training at the Hart Family Dungeon. This match took place shortly. I think I was only home for about a month between my time in IWA and WWC. I wrestled for IWA, then I switched to WWC. Then I had to come back for a while to take care of some business, and then I went back to work for WWC Puerto Rico shortly after this match. As you can see, I'm losing a lot of blood at this point in the fight. They don't call him Abdullah the Butcher for nothing. Honest John claiming he's given me the beating my father should have given me. And now we see Abdullah grab the referee, grabbing him by the forehead. I try and stop him, but the referee caught part of my forearm there. Either that or he fainted. As you saw, Abdullah the Butcher blocking the chop with the fork. As I said, this was my first match against Abdullah, but as time went on, I did realize he did not like to get chopped. That didn't stop me. There he is, finishing the job on the referee, Dick Gaida, who is down on the canvas, bloodied up from that fork, and I believe Abdullah was disqualified for forking the official at that point. But this match went on another few minutes, and the end of the match gets a little more interesting, so don't stop watching just yet, as Abdullah is just spitting mouthfuls of blood in my face at this point, as one of the referees tries to stop it, but I press slam him outside to the hard concrete floor and go back to choking Abdullah the Butcher, who stabs me in the forearm with a fork to get out of this choke. This is not a technical match by any standpoint. I can wrestle technical. As you can see, the blood just pouring out of me. This was a bloody fight, a big chop there to another referee and a boot for good measure, kicking him and choking him as he's trying to spit blood in my eyes to actually stop me from choking him. But I want to kill him at this point. You can see the blood dripping out of my forehead. I want to extract my revenge on Abdullah, nailing him with some shots. But this guy is almost impervious to pain. I did find some tricks how to hurt him though. As our feud went on over the course of the years, I did find more of his weak points, and now they're sending the Stampede Wrestling locker room out there to try and get some order. The event is over. There's Ravenous Randy Myers, who's now in Defy Wrestling, a big star in Defy. There's Jinder Mahal, speaking of which, who I just kicked Jinder Mahal in the face. Back to choking Abdullah the Butcher, some future stars in this match for sure, as you see the blood pouring out of both of us. It's hard to hurt Abdullah with these body shots with the thick layer of fat he has on him. He ended up eventually getting so fat that he is now confined to a wheelchair. How he's still alive, I don't know. But he manages to throw me outside of the ring there. And the crowd was going wild for this match. We did have a rematch in this same arena the next year and had more than double the crowd. And this was actually the biggest crowd Stampede Wrestling had had for years. This was a low point in Stampede Wrestling, despite having Natalia, Rick Victor, Tyson Kidd, Ted Hart, Davey Boy Smith Jr., Jinder Mahal, Randy Myers, and many others. This was a low point for Stampede Wrestling, so this event was a big one for us at the time, and it was the farewell of Stampede Wrestling ultimately. The Hart House had been sold, Stu had died, and this was the last hurrah, so to speak, as I'm attacking everyone in sight that's trying to stop me, have my match here against Abdullah. And this was kind of a dream match for me at the time, because at that point, before I got to know him better and find out what a piece of garbage he is as a human being, he was actually one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Now he grabs me by the hair, throws a guardrail down, and he throws me by the hair into the crowd and that hard concrete floor. Now Honest John's giving him one of the guardrail poles, and he's going after me with the pole, which is covered in blood. There's blood absolutely everywhere, and here Abdullah runs away. He didn't want to finish this fight. You see him waddling away. Now I have the pole, but there's people between us, and it's over. We're going to go backstage here in a second, but
What an introduction to Abdullah. Back off! Get out of here! I don't need anyone looking at this. I want this on me forever. I want to remember you, Abdullah the Butcher. I don't want to forget. I want to know that you did this because one day, very, very soon, I'm gonna get my revenge. You mark my words, Abdullah. This is not over.
Thank you for watching the Hannibal TV. Please like this video if you enjoyed it and click the subscribe button to not miss any of our latest shoot interviews, match videos, or news updates. Follow us on Twitter at the Hannibal TV